Well, good healthy cows are the fundamental of cheddar cheese making. Well-fed cows, contented in their lives, produce the sort of milk which makes the very best cheese. Our milk is collected direct from the farms, 3 of which are our own farms. There are about 20 other local farmers from whom we collect, and the milk is delivered in loads anything up to 25,000 litres a time into the cheese dairy. The milk is unloaded and the literage is checked and transferred to the silos, from which it will be drawn the following day for making into cheese. And the first process of that cheese making process is indeed to pasteurize the milk from the milk silo as it goes to the cheese dairy. The pasteurization process now is considered very important, as we are most concerned that everything that we produce conforms to all the requirements that the supermarkets may have. The milk then passes through to the cheese vats, and at that stage the milk is at blood temperature. Now, blood temperature is the ideal temperature at which milk will ripen. We say ripen, some people might say sour. But what we're actually doing is adding a starter culture, a lactic culture, which is a little bit like a freeze-dried natural yogurt, which starts to acidify the milk during the process before the rennet is added. Now, when the rennet is added, the milk then coagulates. It's stirred in for a short period of time, and then the whole vat of milk is allowed to settle and the junket to form, and it takes about 35 minutes. Curds and whey are then run from the cheese vat into what we call the cooling tables. Now, the cooling tables are there for 2 primary purposes. Firstly, as we say, to cool the curds and whey, but more importantly to separate the curds from the whey. And you can see that the whey is being encouraged to go through the perforated membranes to ensure that we retain all the curd, and the whey goes through for further processing. Now, that further processing involves first of all taking out the small amounts of cream that have been left in the whey, and they're extracted through a separator, a centrifuge, and made into butter. What is left then is the whey from which we extract the protein, which gets used for food ingredients. The lactose, which is left then in the whey, is then taken from the water in which it is effectively suspended, and the lactose is then used for animal feed, and the water that is left is sufficiently clean to be able to use it to replace mains water. So we could actually say it's the ultimate in recycling. What is milk in a cow today will actually be tap water tomorrow. You can see back on the cooling table that the curds are being freed from the whey as fast as possible. And you can see a rotating arm there which keeps the curd broken up to allow the whey to drain out. And that's most important, that we drain the whey off as quickly as we possibly can in order to get the curds to the right texture that we're looking for before we mill them and put them into the moulds. Once the whey is drained out, we're then looking to open a channel to allow any further drainage to seep into the central perforated channel, to allow that whey to get away and allow our curds to develop the texture which is absolutely essential in farmhouse cheese making. Now, you'll see there's an awful lot of hand labour going on here, and this is part of what we call our PDO process, our product of designated origin. Only farms which do this process by hand can actually call their cheese West Country farmhouse cheddar, and indeed only those from the West Country can indeed use that PDO. Once the curds have been formed into 2 banks with a clear central drainage channel, the thing that you probably don't realise at this stage is how much they're fusing together as a one solid mass, or in this case it's two solid mass. And you'll see just how rapidly these curds, these individual pieces of curd, no bigger than a grain of wheat, are now all forming together into a solid mass. Now that solid mass we then need to handle, so it's cut into slices, very big slices, and allows further drainage. And you will probably notice as it's happening that the curds on the bottom are well fused in to the mass, and by turning over we actually do the same then for the curds that were on the top. So we're beginning to get a really smooth textured section of curd in each case. And as we go through the process, it is all about improving that texture which we need to make the best cheese. Now, by heaping one section of the curd up on top of the other, what we're looking to do is to increase the stretchiness of the curd. So what is actually happening is, by increasing the height at which we stack it, we're forcing those lower sections of curd to stretch out. Because what we're looking to do is to produce a texture on this curd which is, if you like, slightly similar to toasted cheese. You know, when you toast the cheese, that the strands of curd, strands of cheese will stretch out. And that's what we're looking to do with our curds, is to make them into that stretchy texture that you will actually see a little more obviously if you toasted the cheese after it's matured. In the cooler in front of you now, there is approximately 1.9 tons of cheese. And when you consider that all this has to be moved a number of times inside an hour, you will recognize just how much physical effort is involved in the traditional hand method of making cheese. You can see now these curds being stacked even higher to increase that stretch that we were referring to earlier. Now they're being stacked 3 high in order to get ourselves into a situation where the stretch is really increased. We're looking for something that's almost catapult elastic by the time it is ready for milling. Now, before we can mill it, we have to cut the pieces of curd down to a size that we can feed into the mill. Each of the pieces of curd is being halved in size, and you can see then they're fed into the mill. Now the mill is there to slice these pieces of curd up into small segments about the size of half a thumb. If you can imagine how big half your thumb is, that's about the size that we are looking to cut the curd into. Now, the reason that we're doing that is to ensure that when it comes to adding the salt, we can make certain that the salt is properly mixed throughout the curd. On goes the salt. Now, a lot of people ask me why we put salt onto curd. It is, in fact, a wonderful preservative, and without putting salt onto the curd, the cheese would go rancid. So the salt is used purely as a preservative to ensure that the curd can ripen into a fully matured cheese without any effect of rancidity at all.